Holiday in the Sun and Bobby Moore. In the days after the tour, there were stories emerging that we'd split, even though Watching the Wildlife had been released a couple of weeks before. They were going to play the video on the tube, and Paul and I were invited up to do a brief interview and try to convince people that we were on a break rather than splitting up. If it were announced that the band had split, then our final release would die. We sat down with Paula Yates and were pretty vague. Paul said he was going to do his own thing, and I said the lads were going to work with another singer. It was the last time I'd be with Paul as a member of Frankie, and this is probably a good point to reflect on my relationship with Pablo. We'd known each other for 5 years and had spent the last 3 of them in the same bubble. In all that time, I'd never had a cross words with him, and that still applies today. He's just a lovely guy. He has his faults like we all do, but I love him. Wildlife entered the charts at 37 and struggled to 28 before tailing off. Even though chart success was dwindling, the amount of cash being spent on the making of the singles wasn't. Trevor thought that the third 12-inch release should be an orchestral version. What was the point? The single was finished. I'm not sure how much money was spent recording the orchestra, but it must have been a ridiculous amount considering what would be recouped from the potential sales of the single. Do you know how much it costs to get a full orchestra to play? I think it cost about 30 grand just for the arrangement. I reckon it would cost about another 20 grand to get the guys to sit down and play it, and that's before you have to spend days in the studio mixing it and fucking about to your heart's content. Let's say a conservative estimate of the recording cost was about 60 grand, then we'd have to sell about 250,000 copies of that 12-inch alone to recoup its cost. That was never going to happen. Don't get me wrong, I think it sounds great. Who wouldn't want their song interpreted by an orchestra? Spending 60 grand on a remix was insanity in anybody's book and something that wouldn't have happened with any other label. Before any decisions were made about what was going to happen next, Claire and I went on holiday for 2 weeks in Cancun. Nobody had heard of it then, and when we arrived they were still building it. These days it's an extremely popular retreat, but I would hate to see what the damage the tourist dollar has done to the tiny island. The holiday will be remembered for the sunburn. On our first morning we wake up at the crack of dawn and have eaten and have plotted up by the pool by 8 a.m. The sun's already beaten down, but we think it can't be that strong at that time of the morning, so we lay out. I didn't know that I was close to the equator and the sun is peaking all day long. I go for precaution and slap on some semi-protective sun cream. Claire lashes on the zero protection Hawaiian Tropic. It might as well have been olive oil. Within 90 minutes we'd both been basted. I got burnt and was walking around like John Wayne. Claire got burnt so badly she couldn't get dressed for 3 days. What a great way to start your holiday. When we'd recovered, we spent the time chilling. I went paragliding for the first time and did a bit of jet skiing, and both of us took in a day trip to the Mayan ruins at Chichen Itza. We took in a bullfight. It was a scaffolding ring that had been thrown up on a bit of land. We lasted 5 minutes and then left. Way too brutal for us both. I remember being in a pizza restaurant waiting for my jalapeno special to turn up and hearing Warriors on the radio. It was a real buzz. I'd become blasé about hearing our songs on the radio in the UK and Europe, but to hear it on this tiny island on the other side of the world was really cool. What wouldn't be cool would be my arse the next day after the jalapeno special was eaten. I apologise for the following, but this book's about highs and lows and extremes, and I was about to be on the end of extreme pain. I hope you're not eating. The pizza was lovely, and the fat jalapenos were hot, but not too hot. I didn't know at the time, and would find out to my cost in the very near future, the seeds were not to be eaten. Oh really? Oh shit. And didn't I just? We've all had the shits at one point in our lives, so you can all relate, and that justifies me bringing it up. Let's not be coy here. I shit through the eye of a needle for a day and a half. What was coming out was only the size of gravel, but it felt like someone was pulling a pineapple out of my arse. I was in fucking agony. Insane pain. My guts are bubbling like Vesuvius and the eruptions are frequent. Me ring is stinging so much I have to take a plastic bag filled with ice cubes to apply it immediately after expulsion. I've never known anything like it before or since. There were about 10 fresh jalapenos on that pizza and I ate every single one. Don't eat the seeds, people. The lads had no plan in place, but if we were going to get a singer, then maybe we should do what every other band does and stick an advert in the NME. The ad's placed and an open audition is held at the depot in King's Cross. There are loads of people there and they were filtered down to about 15 that were called back to do some recording with us. We returned the next week and the candidates came in and sang along to a tape and we recorded their performance. There were some absolute beauts. One guy came in, about 5 feet tall, skin-tight jeans and pixie boots, half a vest revealing a curly blonde chest that looked like a bear's couch, and singing like John Anderson. The next guy comes in. He looks like Morrissey, sings like Morrissey, and dances like Morrissey. They were just two of the absolute corkers that I remember. The filtration system was not living up to its billing. We knew it wasn't going to be easy, but if this is what we're going to have to suffer, then let's hope we find one soon. We set up all our recording gear in a studio called 313 on Holloway Road. We were in there for months working on new material, and if we came across a singer, then they would come down and have a warble over the backing tracks we were writing. A guy called John from Birmingham sent in a tape to our office, and he was a lovely guy who had a boss singing voice, but when he spoke he sounded like Noddy Older. Another lovely guy flew over from Germany, but when he sang over the tracks it made it sound like the Scorpions. It was dawning on us that this new singer would have to be the fourth lad, and getting along with him was as important as how in tune he was. Our thoughts turned back to Pete Wiley, and some time had passed since we'd called him from Holland. He comes down to meet us with no firm commitment other than to go in the studio for a few days and play. We all shared a let's see what happens kind of attitude and assembled at 313. We played for about 4 days. We played loads of Beatles songs and Doors songs, and Pete enjoyed singing them. We kicked around a few of his ideas, but he wouldn't sing any Frankie stuff. I asked him about this recently, and he told me that being in the room with us was a little intimidating, and that infiltrating this tight group of 3 big personalities was not easy for him. We switched from the rehearsal room to Mark's house and did a bit of recording with Pete, but it wasn't happening. He wasn't right for us, and we weren't right for him. Although the vocalist job is still vacant, we carry on writing and recording demos. Looking back, there was way too many machines playing and not enough instruments. We had all learned how to use the same toys as Trevor and Lipson had used on our albums, and taken the stuff we'd learned into our own writing process. During this time, Mark and I had our last public engagement as members of Frankie Goes to Hollywood. We were invited by our Nike pal Dave Roberts to play in a charity football match. The game was hosted at Gateshead Stadium, and we'd be playing for Frank Bruno's All-Stars against Steve Cram's athletes. We'd done a bit of celebrity football before when we played in a five-a-side competition at Loftus Road on the new and controversial plastic pitch. At that time, Nike had just done a rights deal to have their logo on the shirts of the comic strip club Melchester Rovers. Nike now had Ian Rush and Roy Reese. Dave gave us limited edition Melchester kits to wear at Loftus Road. There were only about 10 made and probably the closest you'll get to a designer football kit. We had a ringer playing for us. Gary was the boyfriend of our secretary Jenny and played semi-pro for Hendon. He was our star man. Semi-pros aren't mentally equipped to playing friendlies. There's no such thing as a friendly to them. One of the mission found that out when we played the Goths in the quarter-final. True to their goth core, they all wore black t-shirts and beads. One of them tried a slide tackle on Gary, who leaned as he rode the tackle and deliberately made contact with his opponent's jaw. It was done in a flash, and we only appreciated this subtlety when we watched the game back on video later on. The recipient was left with those classic words ringing in his ears whilst he lay on the floor counting his teeth. "What's the matter with you? It's a fucking man's game." The game in Gateshead was much bigger league than the one at Loftus Road. There'd be a few thousand watching and plenty of quality sportsmen on show. We arrived late at a hotel outside Newcastle on the eve of the game. We go down to the basement for a game of snooker and bump into Dennis Waterman. We have a chat and a few beers and Dave Roberts joins us. He was filling us in on the people who would be playing and claiming Ian Rush would be turning up. The game wasn't until Sunday, so early Saturday evening we're all taken out to eat at Tuxedo Junction. I'm sitting next to Frank Bruno and Northern Ireland international David McCreary, who was playing for Newcastle at the time. That would have cost me a fortune in an auction. After dinner, David wanted to take us to meet this guy called Gaza, so we go to a different part of the club and meet Gaza. He was leaving Newcastle and there were rumours he'd go to Liverpool, and we were trying to persuade him further. I'd meet him 20 years later at St Mary's Stadium, Southampton, and remind him of that first meeting. I asked him how he was doing. He was so candid and open and spoke to me like I was his pal. He was telling me he was struggling with the drink, and his honesty took me back a little. When he left the room, people were shaking his hand and shouting their goodbyes, and you could really feel the love the whole room had for this sport and idol. You could tell that David McCreary felt that same love for him too. We leave Tuxedo Junction and head for the Tuxedo Princess floating on the Tyne. Mark and I, Dave Roberts, Dennis Waterman and football commentators Jim Rosenthal and Alan Parry are all in a round. The round increases by one when Ian Rush turns up. Dave's grinning from ear to ear. I told you, you doubting Scouse bastards. The next day we drive to the stadium by bus and Dave Roberts puts me right on the spot. Hey Nasher, tell Daly that joke about Fatima Whitbread. Sitting 2 seats in front of me are Daley Thompson and Linford Christie. John Regis is sitting just behind. I don't know if these people are close with Fatima. One of them might be offended. I could end up with a smack. Yeah, tell us that joke about Fatima, says Daly. Fatima Whitbread went to the doctors, and when the doctor asked her what was wrong, she said she was getting worried about the amount of body hair she had. The doctor asked her if it was on her chest. No, she replied, on me bollocks. Daly cracks up and I'm off the hook. After arriving and getting changed, the teams are announced. I'm playing right back and Alan Parry is left back. It was just as well that we had Steve Coppell and Bobby Moore as centre halves. I was going to play football with Bobby Moore. Mark's equally delighted because he's playing up front with Rushy. About 5 minutes in, Bobby takes a through ball down on his chest and passes it to me and says, "Go on, son." Can you believe that? First off, it's like proper football speak. Go on, son, stick with him, close him down, well in, son. Secondly, the way he said it was like he played football with me every week. In that one sentence, I could see why he was rated as such a great captain. Coppell to Moore, Moore to Nash, Nash to Rush. Every West Ham fan I've met since has been told this story, and to a man and woman, they've all wanted to stab me. What an absolute gentleman he was as well. I was told later by Dave that Bobby drove up from London on the morning of the game, played 90 minutes, had a shower and an orange juice and drove back home again. There was never any mention of a fee. Class act, and I don't think you could find anyone to disagree. Mark's had an even better result than me. He didn't get a pass off Bobby or Steve, but he laid on a goal for Rushy. Halfway through the first half, I get switched from left to right. Alan Parry, 15 years my senior, was getting roasted by Johnny Two-Chest Regis. 5 minutes after the switch, I'm thinking that I really should stop smoking and lose a bit of weight. I try to close JR down and he kicks it and goes past me like he's on casters. Even the air displacement for a guy that size is enough to knock you over. Thankfully, I got subbed at half time. I did 45 minutes without Bobby having to have a word, so that was a top result for me. Gateshead had been a nice distraction, but we didn't find a singer up there. Through a mutual friend, Ped had become pals with Dee Harris, the former singer in Fashion. Dee had been long gone when we supported his former bandmates, so we'd never met him before. Dee, or Dave as I'll call him, was hanging out with Ped and his name came up as a candidate. Dave comes to the studio and things start going well. He comes up with some lyrics and melodies for the backing tracks and contributes some guitar too. He looked cool and he had a swagger about him. Things were looking up.